Hello, bookish friends. We need to talk about how paranormal romance warped so romantasy could run. Welcome to another episode of Books and Ballgowns. Now, for those of you who don't know about Books and Ballgowns, which is probably most of you, because to be honest, I did one episode on this and then went on my break and then decided that this was a series. Basically, when I was younger and actually had disposable income, I bought a lot of fancy pretty dresses. I have nowhere to wear them. I've never worn a lot of them. And so, look, I'm going to put them on and we're going to talk about book stuff and it's going to be great. Which brings us to the topic of today's video, which is paranormal romance. I have to say, I do really love that I'm doing my best to go for this classy, bougie, bookish bitch vibe, and I'm drinking a £6 wine from Costco. And also this dress was from Jane Norman, probably in 2005. So, first things first, let's establish what paranormal romance is versus romantasy. Very, very simply, to put it in layman's terms, paranormal romance is supernatural creatures but set in our universe. Romantasy is often, supernatural creatures, fantasy elements set in a different universe. So with romantasy, it's going to be somewhere completely different, not the world as we know it. It often has supernatural creatures. It obviously has some kind of magic system, just an AU type book. Whereas paranormal romance is going to be like your Twilights, for example. It's going to be your vampires, your werewolves, your witches, your whoever, set in this universe that we know now. I am famously, and when I say famously, I mean I've said it before, not a romantasy girly. I am aggressively a paranormal romance girly. And I firmly believe that paranormal romance needs to make a comeback, which is what we're going to be talking about today. But in order to talk about why it needs to make a comeback, we need to talk a little bit about the history of it. I'm terrified every day at the thought that there may be people watching this video that were born in 2000 that aren't 5 years old and are in fact 25 years old. This deeply disturbs me. So, you may not all be aware, but back in the day, paranormal romance in the early 2000s was all the rage, particularly after 9/11, where people wanted a real sense of escapism, to, I guess, escape the terrible things that were happening in the world at the time. The problem is when something is popular, which we are also seeing with romantasy right now, the market gets saturated. So you had your Twilights, you had your True Bloods, you had your Vampire Diaries, to name a few. There are a lot of paranormal romance authors that are really big names now coming onto the game, like Kresley Cole, Nalini Singh, Gina Showalter. And publishers just started getting the hint that people were over werewolves, they were over vampires, witches, all of these different things. And so they stopped buying those kinds of series. This is not the best. Very classy. This is not the best glass for this because it keeps spilling onto my hand, or maybe I just keep overfilling it, but why pour yourself a glass of wine if it's not an extra large one, And I wouldn't so much say that it's that people stopped loving supernatural creatures, but I think the term paranormal romance became something that was very much affiliated and associated with being cringe. And I think it didn't help that as we shifted from, the real people covers to what we have now, which, to be honest, is just as bad in my personal opinion, because it's that real soulless corporate cartoon artwork slop that we're getting a lot of now. It didn't help that when we shifted to the cartoon covers, paranormal romance didn't really follow. So to give you an example, we have a very big name in paranormal romance who still, in my personal opinion, should be bigger than she is, and she's pretty big. We've got Nalini Singh. Now this is an example of a paranormal romance cover where it's basically a dude's face. Another example, and you know how much I love Victoria Aveline, or Aveline, I'm not 100% sure because I'm pretty sure I read an audiobook or listened to one where the author's name was pronounced Aveline, so I'm not sure. But you see here you got your classic headless torso paranormal romance. Because yes, even your alien abduction romances are paranormal romance. They might be on a different world, but it's still set in our universe. And these types of covers are very much now considered to be cringe. And I get it, because there was a time where I would see these covers and I would automatically refuse to read these books because I would think they're going to be trashy, they're going to be terribly written, they're going to be really bad. And it is a shame because these books, for example, are absolutely phenomenal. But I get it. Appearances matter. What's going to convince you to pick up a book? Point being, I think that was also one of the reasons why people started to associate paranormal romance with cringe. But like I said, that doesn't mean that people fell out of love with supernatural creatures. So what happened is there was a shift. And so this was rebranded into fantasy settings. So it would be like fae courts instead of vampires. It would be magic users instead of demons, or whatever the case is. And ultimately, this led on to my next point, which is Romantasy was overall deemed to be more marketable to both YA readers and crossover readers. Paranormal romance is aggressively adult. It's very violent, it's usually got open door sex scenes. It might be very, very spicy indeed, or it might not have a great deal of spice, but either way, it's gonna have it in there. And it's just a big, emotional, adult, supernatural, creaturey mess. In a good way. So you see around the 2010s, that's where Romantasy really started dominating the shelves, like Throne of Glass, ACOTAR, etc. It was really here that publishers realised that they could really capitalise on this. So they could start marketing it to YA readers, and they could start marketing it to fantasy readers, predominantly women, to be clear, not so much male fantasy readers, but predominantly women. And the focus shifted to being more slower burn, more kind of adventure-based, rather than this kind of adult, sexy, bedroom-based type stories. And I very much want to do a brief aside here and say, paranormal romance is not really any different than contemporary romance. So if you're a contemporary romance reader, chances are you're going to love paranormal romance. It is the same thing pretty much, but just with higher stakes and supernatural creatures. So I don't want to suggest that paranormal romance is just non-stop smut. It's really not. It's very, very, very complex, very rich, obviously depending on what you read. Publishers started going for this heavy world-building, high fantasy kind of romance subplot added in type of publishing, rather than going for paranormal romances, very sensual, almost contemporary romance-like, romance-focused way of storytelling. And indeed, paranormal romances, generally, because they don't have to establish a new world, paranormal romance books tend to be small but immersive. You're not having to do all of this heavy lifting of having this brand new world to create, but you are having to create, I guess, a community and a race of people or a culture around whatever supernatural creatures are involved. And there was this shift from that small but immersive world into this really world-heavy, creating this whole new world and everything within it, which automatically means you're going to get a lot of world-building, exposition, fantasy, and things like that. One of the things that I think is a great shame about paranormal romance is the fact that it was unapologetically feminine and female, very much like contemporary romance. It often centers around female desire, around melodrama, around all the things that we enjoy within contemporary romances. And I think there was probably a bit of a cultural shift away from that to the more kind of quote-unquote respectable, I don't believe it's more respectable, but quote-unquote respectable, high fantasy kind of settings with romance subplots in there. And it's almost like, in order to be taken more seriously, Romantasy kind of stripped away some of the more feminine or traditionally or typically female elements of the story. Not every Romantasy did that. To be clear, I'm not saying this is the case for all of them, but I'm just saying this was kind of the trend over time and what happened. Now, here's the really important part. Publishers stepped away from paranormal romance, started really hammering home and focusing on Romantasy, and still is to this day. But indie authors and Kindle Unlimited really changed the game. And so whilst Romantasy is all the rage now and paranormal romance really is not so much, that is not to say that paranormal romance didn't keep going, because it did. It just features a lot more heavily within the works of indie authors and Kindle Unlimited. And so you still had your shifter romances, you still have your vampires, you still have your werewolves. In fact, Nalini Singh, for example, is still publishing this series to this day. So it's not gone. The landscape has just changed, where paranormal romance isn't really getting so much of the traditional publishing attention, but digital readers are still very much in the trenches of paranormal romance. And now, interestingly, monster romance is becoming all the rage again. So with this shift back to monster romance, which a lot of the time is paranormal romance, these two worlds are colliding. But a lot of people don't even realise that this is its own subgenre of romance, which is sad, which brings me on to why I feel paranormal romance needs to make a comeback. Look, paranormal romance is high stakes, fast-paced, unapologetically female and unashamedly horny, and we love to see it. It very effectively balances romance and danger, and in a way that I think Romantasy doesn't do quite so well, particularly because they're constantly having all of these high fantasy elements in it. It's also deeply character-driven, which I think again can get lost in Romantasy. Because again, the focus in Romantasy is building these rich, complex worlds, and the view can often be quite external, I think. Whereas paranormal romance, you know the world that you're living in already, and even though you have to establish certain things like the supernatural creatures within it, you don't have to do quite so much heavy lifting, and so it really gives you that space to be very, very, very character driven. I also think that generally a lot of contemporary romance readers who don't read Romantasy would really get on with paranormal romance. I am certainly one of those people who loves contemporary romance. I've got a whole bookshelf here. You can't see most of it, but just all of this bookshelf is just contemporary romance. And I love contemporary romance. I will always read it. One of the things that I definitely found myself lacking, though, in contemporary romance is stakes. I didn't feel like there were enough stakes. I didn't feel like it went far enough. And certainly one of the things that contemporary romance purports to do, but does not in fact do, or very, very rarely actually does, is enemies to lovers. Everyone and their mother has written a contemporary romance enemies to lovers book, and yet they are not enemies. At most, it's dislike to lovers. Oftentimes it's rivals to lovers, but packaged as enemies to lovers. My dog has decided to join me, and now I've lost my train of thought, but hey, I think I remembered my train of thought. So paranormal romance, very easy to get enemies to lovers, because when you got a werewolf, when you got a vampire, when you got a demon versus a human, when you've got a Valkyrie and whatever Valkyries hate, it's very, very easy to have them believably be enemies, and you can really raise the stakes and have things literally like the hero and the heroine torturing each other and have justifiable reasons for that. And paranormal romance, just to be clear, doesn't have to be things like vampires and werewolves. If you find that cringe, if you've had enough of Twilight, it doesn't have to be that. Any kind of monster you can think of, if it's set in this world, that's paranormal romance. Aliens, for example, like I said. Valkyrie, which I think is pretty fucking cool. A big spider monster with as many magic sticks as it's got legs. Yeah, if it's set in this world, that's paranormal romance. There is something for everything in paranormal romance, and I really truly believe that it needs to make a comeback in a really big way. And I think this is part of the reason why I love paranormal romance so much. And I am actually currently writing my first book, and it is a romantasy, but it's a paranormal romance at heart. So for my kind of final words, what I'm going to say is this. 1, I'm not shitting on romantasy. I don't personally get on super well with it. It's just not for me. It's not romance focused enough. The high fantasy doesn't gel with me. If you love romantasy, that is so valid, and I'm happy for you, and I'm a big proponent of read what brings you joy, because otherwise, why are we fucking bothering? What I will say is, though, if you are even slightly intrigued, I think you should go out and try a paranormal romance. There is going to be something for everyone. There will be something for you. And another thing I'll say is, look, I don't like headless torso covers or just pictures of men's faces on covers. It's not what does it for me. But please, please don't let it put you off trying paranormal romance, because the content within the books is often phenomenal. To give you a few starting places, and these are relatively big series, but this is what I kind of recommend to wean you into it. I will never stop recommending Victoria Aveling's series, which is the Clickanian series. It starts with Choosing Theo, which is this one. It's an alien series. It's fantastic. The world building is so rich. The writing is so complex. It's just incredible. I love aliens, so that's a thing for me, but I absolutely 100% recommend this. And they are humanoid aliens, and they have normal... Oh, my light just came off. Oh well. They have normal penises as well, so that's a benefit. Secondly, I recommend A Slave to Sensation by Nalini Singh. Technically, she is an incredible writer. And when I say technically, I don't mean like a caveat. I mean like she is technically an incredible writer. Her books just hit from book 1. The quality never slips. And this is the Shifters sci-human romances. A Slave to Sensation is the first book. It's very sci-fi while still being very, very romance focused and having those fantasy world building elements in it. If you are into the more traditional, like vampires, werewolves, etc., highly recommend Kresley Cole's Immortals After Dark series. The first book being A Hunger Like No Other. Again, check the trigger warnings. Spoke so long, I drank all my wine. And Kresley Cole's series, to be clear, is not just vampires and werewolves, it's everything. Or if you want something different, Gina Showalter's series. This is not the first book because I read that on KU, but I found this in a secondhand shop, and I think it's either, it might be like the second or the third, I think. This is all about demons, and it's the Lords of the Underworld series, and I love demons. Oh, hello, it's Future Collie here, polishing off this bottle of wine. wanted to jump in and say I didn't mention pestilence. This is way overfilled. I'm never using this glass to film again because I've spilt it all over me several times. Laura Thalassa has written an excellent series called The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse series. Talked about it before, I'll talk about it again. It's like The Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, but make it sexy. And she's even written a paranormal romance series that feels quite a lot like Romantasy in some ways. And that is The Bargainer. Now this is like the omnibus. Book 1 was a lot more like a paranormal romance, and then book 2 felt a lot more like a Romantasy to me. But anyway, for a really like hardcore paranormal romance series, I would recommend the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse series, the first one being Pestilence. There's 4 books. They do get a little bit samey, but I think also if you like the premise and you like her writing, they are different enough that they're going to capture your attention. And if you're like me, it's kind of on the spectrum, and you're like, oh, I quite enjoy reading the same thing over and over, you're probably going to like that as well. So there's plenty out there, and I would truly, deeply love to see a resurgence of this genre. I think I've talked enough about paranormal romance today, although there's still more I could say, but I won't. Predominantly because I've drank enough wine that I am a little bit wavy now, and I should probably stop drinking wine at 1 p.m. in the middle of the day. Subscribe for more videos like this, and not just like this. I'm a massive horror reader and a massive romance reader. I know that that makes no sense, but that's just what I yearn for. My heart yearns for both violent decapitation or passionate romance and nothing in between. Next week I'm going to be doing a video on a kind of TikTok-y-esque, very romance book coded movie that seems to be cropping up now more and more and more on my feed. So look forward to that because it's going to be hilarious and good. Hopefully. We'll see. I haven't filmed it. Subscribe, please. I'm begging. I'm not above begging. I'll even grovel. Give the video a like or whatever else you're supposed to do on YouTube. Is there a bell icon anymore? Press that too. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video.